The cold, metal walls of the military facility felt like a prison to Corporal Ethan Richards. He had been stationed on the edge of the galaxy for nearly 6 months, overseeing the alien prisoners captured in the recent war. The mission was clear: keep them locked up, study them, and report back to command. But the job wasn't as easy as it sounded. The aliens weren't like the humans he had grown up with. These creatures were from distant worlds, and their ways were as mysterious as the stars themselves. Among the prisoners was one woman who stood out from the rest. She was tall and strong, with greenish skin that shimmered faintly in the light. Her eyes were sharp and filled with hatred, and her presence made the air feel heavier. She was a warrior, a captain in the alien army, and now she was a prisoner of war. Her name was not known to anyone on the base. She refused to speak to anyone, not even the guards who brought her food. They simply called her Prisoner 117. Ethan had seen her before, from a distance, but today was different. Today, he had been assigned to keep watch over her cell. It was a small, dark room, reinforced with metal walls, and a force field that blocked her from escaping. The alien woman sat in the corner, staring at the floor, her arms crossed over her chest, as if the world no longer mattered to her. Ethan took his position by the observation window, where he could keep an eye on her. His orders were clear: report any unusual behavior, but otherwise, do not interact with the prisoner. Still, he couldn't help but feel a strange pull of curiosity. What was she thinking? Why did she look so defeated, even though she was a warrior? Wasn't she supposed to be a proud soldier of her people? For a long time, there was only silence. Then, unexpectedly, the alien woman looked up at him through the window. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a brief moment, he felt a chill run down his spine. She didn't say anything, but her gaze was filled with contempt and fury. It was as if she could see right through him, as if she knew all the things he was afraid to admit. Ethan shifted uncomfortably under her stare but refused to look away. He had been trained for this. He was a soldier. He wasn't supposed to feel sympathy for the enemy, especially one who had been part of a force that had nearly wiped out entire cities on Earth. Yet, something about her eyes, something that wasn't just anger, made him wonder if there was more to her than the war she had been caught up in. "Why are you staring at me?" she finally asked, her voice sharp and cold, echoing slightly through the room. Ethan was taken aback. She had spoken. He hadn't expected that. "I'm just observing," he replied, trying to sound calm, though his voice was a little rough. "You're a prisoner. My job is to keep watch." She snorted, the sound bitter and mocking. "Prisoner," she repeated. "Is that what you think? I'm not your prisoner. You have no idea what I am." Ethan didn't respond immediately. He wasn't sure how to. He had read the reports about her, about how she had been a key figure in the alien invasion, how her ship had been destroyed by Earth's defenses. But she didn't seem like the enemy in this moment. She seemed like someone who had been broken, someone who had lost everything. "Why are you still here?" the alien woman demanded. "If you think you've won, then leave me alone." Ethan shook his head. "I'm not here to gloat. I just do my job. And you're a prisoner because of the war. I don't make the rules." For a moment, the alien woman said nothing. She looked away, staring at the wall, but Ethan could still see the tension in her posture. She was exhausted, physically and mentally, and even though he had been taught to see the enemy as nothing more than a threat, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was more than just a soldier. She was a person, just like him. "What's your name?" he asked, surprising himself. He wasn't supposed to care about this alien woman, but the question slipped out before he could stop it. The woman's head snapped back toward him, her eyes narrowing. "You don't get to know my name," she spat. "You don't deserve it." Ethan's face reddened slightly. "I wasn't trying to insult you. I was just curious." She laughed bitterly. "Curious? About what?" "About how my people are suffering. About how we lost everything because of your kind." Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but the words stuck in his throat. He couldn't argue with her. He knew that his people had been at war with hers for years. The alien race had invaded Earth, but the tides had turned. Now, they were prisoners, captured and left at the mercy of their enemies. He wanted to say something that would make her feel better, but he didn't know how. So he simply stood there, watching her in silence. And for the first time since arriving on this distant planet, Ethan realized that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't just watching a prisoner. Maybe he was watching someone who, in her own way, had been caught in a war she didn't choose. The days dragged on at the military base. Ethan went about his duties, but his mind often wandered back to the alien woman. He found himself thinking about her eyes. Those sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to pierce right through him. He had never met anyone like her before. She wasn't just an enemy. She was a person, and that was something he couldn't shake off. The routine was always the same. Ethan would check on her cell, keeping his distance, and following the strict orders to avoid direct contact. But something changed after their first conversation. Every time he passed by, he felt the need to glance at her. She never looked up, always sitting in the corner, as if waiting for something, or perhaps waiting for nothing at all. One morning, as Ethan walked past the observation window, he noticed something different. The alien woman wasn't sitting in her usual corner. Instead, she stood by the force field, her hands resting against it, staring out into the vast emptiness of the desert that surrounded the base. Ethan's curiosity got the better of him, and without thinking, he stepped closer to the window. His breath fogged up the glass as he watched her. There was a sadness in her posture, a deep sense of loss that seemed to radiate from her. It made Ethan wonder, what had she lost? Her home, her family, her freedom. Is it really so different out there? He asked, his voice soft as he spoke aloud, unsure if she could hear him. To his surprise, the alien woman turned to face him, as if she had been waiting for him to speak. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, there was no anger in them, no hatred, just curiosity. Different? She asked, her voice low but steady. It's all the same. There is no difference between the worlds, only the people who inhabit them. Ethan frowned, confused. What do you mean? You came here to invade us. Why would you say that? She stepped closer to the force field, her face serious. Not all of us wanted to invade. Some of us were forced to fight. War is never a choice. It's something we're pushed into. You think we wanted this. You think we wanted to hurt you. Her voice broke slightly, but she quickly steadied herself. Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. He had been trained to see the aliens as enemies, as invaders who had nearly destroyed Earth. But looking at her now, he wasn't so sure. She didn't seem like a mindless soldier. She seemed like someone who had been caught in something much bigger than herself. He hesitated for a long moment before replying. Then why didn't you stop? Why didn't your people just turn back? Her eyes darkened, and for a second, Ethan thought he had said the wrong thing. But then she spoke again, her voice low and full of pain. You don't understand. It's not that simple. When you're born into a war, there's no way out. You fight because you have to. You fight because it's the only thing you know. And once the fighting starts, it doesn't stop until everything is destroyed. Ethan's heart ached as he listened to her words. He had heard about the devastation the aliens had caused, how entire cities had been leveled and countless lives lost. But hearing her speak like this, hearing the pain in her voice, made him realize something he had never considered before. War wasn't just about the battles fought between armies. It was about the people who were caught in the middle, the ones who had no choice but to fight. I'm sorry, Ethan said, the words feeling too small for the weight of the moment. I didn't know. The alien woman stared at him, her eyes searching his face. You don't need to apologize. You don't know what it's like to have everything you've ever known destroyed. And yet, you still have your home, your people, your life. You're lucky. Ethan didn't know how to respond. What could he say? That he was lucky? That he didn't deserve to be lucky while she and her people suffered? He felt a deep sense of guilt, but also a strange feeling of connection. He had never felt anything like this before, not towards the enemy, not towards anyone. "Do you think," Ethan started, his voice hesitant, "that we could have lived in peace if things were different? If the war had never happened?" The alien woman looked down, her expression softening for a moment. "I don't know, but maybe if there was no war, we could have been something else. Something better." Ethan didn't know what to say to that. He wanted to tell her that maybe peace was still possible, that things could change. But deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. War had already taken so much from them both. For the first time since he had met her, Ethan felt like he truly understood her. She wasn't just an enemy. She was a person who had been swept up in a war, just like so many others. And in that moment, he realized that perhaps they weren't so different after all. As Ethan turned to leave, he caught one last glimpse of her through the window. The alien woman was once again standing by the force field, her head tilted slightly as if lost in thought. And for the first time, he didn't see her as a prisoner. He saw her as something more, someone who had been broken, but who still had the strength to survive. Days passed, and Ethan found himself returning to the observation window more often than he should have. Each time he walked past, he felt a strange pull, a desire to speak to the alien woman again. He couldn't explain it, but something in her words had stuck with him, something that made him see her differently. He had always been trained to think of the aliens as enemies, invaders who wanted to destroy humanity. But now the lines between good and evil seemed blurred. Was she really an enemy? Was it fair to judge someone based only on the actions of their people? One afternoon, as Ethan made his rounds, he approached the observation window again. This time, however, there was something different about the way the alien woman stood. She wasn't sitting in her usual spot, or standing by the force field. Instead, she was pacing, her eyes darting from one side of her cell to the other, clearly agitated. Ethan hesitated for a moment before deciding to approach the door. It wasn't his usual routine to engage with her, but something inside him told him that he needed to. He pressed the button to unlock the door, a cautious hand reaching for the handle. The door opened with a soft click, and he stepped inside. The alien woman stopped pacing when she saw him. For a moment, there was a tense silence between them. Her eyes narrowed, not out of suspicion, but out of something else, perhaps a desire for something more than just silence. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice softer than before. Ethan took a deep breath. "I wanted to talk. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about war, and about what it means to be caught in the middle of something you can't control." She regarded him silently for a moment, her sharp features betraying no emotion. Then, to his surprise, she nodded. "You're beginning to understand, aren't you?" "I think so," Ethan replied. "But I still don't fully know what you've been through. I can't understand what it's like to lose everything." The alien woman's eyes softened, a flicker of sadness crossing her face. "You don't have to understand, but you're willing to try, and that's more than anyone else has done for me." Ethan stepped closer, careful not to invade her space. He couldn't help but notice how different she looked now. The harsh, battle-worn image of the alien warrior was gone. In its place was someone who seemed vulnerable, who seemed human in a way. He had never realized how much strength it took to survive the way she had. "Do you ever think about what life could have been like if you weren't here?" Ethan asked, his voice quiet. Her gaze drifted away from him, her shoulders sagging slightly. "Every day, I think about my home, my people. I think about the life I should have had. I was never meant to be a soldier, but war doesn't care about what you were meant to be. It just takes everything and leaves you with nothing." Ethan could hear the pain in her voice. He wanted to reach out, to tell her that it would be okay, but the words didn't come. What could he say? She had lost so much, more than he could ever imagine. "I'm sorry," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. The alien woman turned her eyes back to him, her expression unreadable. You don't need to apologize. You didn't cause any of this. You're just here, just like me." Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. The realization hit him like a wave. She wasn't just a prisoner anymore. She wasn't just an enemy. She was a person who had suffered, just like him. And she wasn't alone, even if she felt like it. "How do you survive?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling slightly. "How do you keep going after everything you've lost?" Her eyes met his, and for a moment, there was a silence between them, filled only with the weight of the question. Then, slowly, she spoke. "You survive because you have to," she said softly. "You survive because giving up is worse than fighting, even if the fight is impossible, even if it's just you against the world." The days seemed to blur together as Ethan found himself spending more time with the alien woman. Each day, he would stop by her cell, and though he never said much at first, it was clear that the bond between them was growing. They didn't talk about the war or the pain they had both endured. Instead, their conversations were simple, sometimes awkward, but always honest. They shared stories about their worlds, their lives before everything changed. Ethan learned that the alien woman had once been a skilled healer, trained to care for the injured and sick in her community. Her people, who had once lived in harmony with nature, had been torn apart by the brutal conflict that ravaged her world. She had been forced into battle, her skills as a healer twisted into tools of war. The story was heartbreaking, and as she spoke, Ethan could hear the regret in her voice. He couldn't help but compare her story to his own. He, too, had been trained for war. His entire life had been shaped by the need to protect his country, his people. But here, with this woman, in this small, sterile room, he realized how little he actually knew about the true cost of war. He had never been forced to fight for his survival in the way she had. One day, as Ethan sat with her, he asked the question that had been haunting him. "Do you ever think about escaping?" Her eyes flickered to him, and for a moment, she said nothing. Ethan instantly regretted asking. But then, slowly, she spoke. "I think about it every day," she admitted. "But there's nowhere to go. My people are gone. The world I knew is gone. What's left for me out there?" Ethan thought about it for a moment. Maybe it's not about escaping. Maybe it's about finding something new, something worth fighting for. The alien woman studied him for a long time, her sharp eyes searching his face. There was something about the way he spoke, the way he believed in the possibility of something better, that made her feel a spark of hope, even if she didn't fully understand it. "I don't know if I can trust that," she said softly. "Hope is a dangerous thing." Ethan smiled, though the sadness in his eyes lingered. "I understand, but sometimes it's all we have." The days continued, and with each passing one, their connection grew. They spent more time together, talking about things that didn't matter in the grand scheme of things, about their favorite foods, their dreams, and their fears. For the first time in a long time, they were simply two people talking, not a soldier and a prisoner, not an enemy and a captive. One afternoon, as Ethan entered her cell, he found the alien woman sitting by the window, looking out at the barren landscape outside. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the desert. She looked so small and fragile in that moment, as if the weight of everything she had experienced was pressing down on her. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked, concern in his voice. She didn't immediately respond, her gaze fixed on the horizon. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I used to dream about the stars," she said, her voice distant. "When I was young, I would lie on the grass at night and look up, and I would wonder about the worlds beyond my own. I never imagined that I would end up here, in a cage, far from everything I once knew." Ethan sat down beside her, quietly. "You're not alone. You're not a prisoner here anymore." The alien woman shook her head. "I still am, but I'm not sure what freedom really means anymore." Ethan didn't have an answer for that. How could he? He had never been in her shoes. All he could do was be there for her, offer her something that felt real in this uncertain world they lived in. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they sat in silence, the bond between them growing stronger. It wasn't just about their shared pain anymore. It was about the possibility of something better. Ethan could see it in her eyes, the spark of hope that had started to flicker back to life. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he had a purpose that went beyond just surviving. Maybe he couldn't change the war, but maybe he could help change her life. Maybe they could both find a way to heal. The next day, Ethan was summoned to the command center. He hadn't expected it, but when he arrived, the tone of the meeting was serious. "We have new orders," his superior announced. "We're going to move forward with the next phase of the operation. The alien prisoner you've been assigned to will be taken for interrogation." Ethan's stomach dropped. He had known this might happen, but hearing it made it feel real. They were going to interrogate her. He couldn't let that happen. "Sir," Ethan said, his voice firm, "I don't think it's right. We don't know enough about her. We haven't even begun to understand why she's here, or what her people want." His superior shot him a sharp look. "This is bigger than you, soldier. Follow orders." But Ethan didn't care about orders anymore. He was no longer just following commands. He was thinking for himself. And in that moment, he knew what he had to do. He couldn't let them take her. Not after everything they had shared. With determination building in his chest, he walked out of the command center, his mind set on one thing. He was going to save her, no matter the cost. Ethan had always been a soldier. He followed orders, did his duty, and stayed focused. But everything had changed since meeting the alien woman. The more time they spent together, the more Ethan realized that the woman was not just a prisoner. She was a person, someone who had been forced into a life she never wanted. He couldn't let them hurt her anymore. The decision had been made. Ethan couldn't sit back and watch her suffer. As he walked back to the barracks after the meeting, his mind raced. He had no plan, no backup, and no idea how to get her out. But the thought of her being taken away for interrogation filled him with dread. He couldn't let that happen. That night, he stood in front of the small window in his room, staring out into the dark desert. The stars were bright, but the barren land below was quiet, almost too quiet. There was nothing here except the base and the soldiers that filled it. And then there was her, the alien woman who had somehow given him a sense of purpose. The next morning, Ethan approached the guards at the cell block. He was on his usual rounds, but this time, he had an idea. He would need help if he was going to get her out. He had no choice but to trust someone else. But who? As he walked past the guards, he saw one of the soldiers, Liam, standing near the entrance. They had worked together before, and though they were not close, Ethan knew he could count on him. Liam had always been a decent guy, smart, loyal, and above all, someone who believed in doing the right thing. "Hey, Liam," Ethan said, walking up to him. Liam looked at him with a raised eyebrow. "What's up?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, making sure no one was listening. "I need your help," he said quietly. "I need to get the alien woman out of here. They're planning to interrogate her." Liam's expression hardened. "What are you talking about? You know what they'll do to her. They won't stop until they get what they want." "I know," Ethan said. "That's why I can't let them take her. I don't care what the orders are. I'm not going to let her suffer anymore." Liam stared at him for a long time, weighing the situation. Finally, he nodded. "All right. What's the plan?" Ethan felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He wasn't alone in this anymore. "We get her out tonight. There's a storm coming in, and the guards will be distracted. I'll need you to cover me while I break her out." Liam nodded again, but there was a hint of worry in his eyes. "This is going to be risky. If we get caught." "I know," Ethan said, cutting him off. "But it's the only chance we have." That evening, the storm rolled in just as predicted. The sky darkened, and the winds picked up, howling across the base. The sand swept across the desert in waves, making it harder for anyone to see clearly. It was the perfect cover. Ethan made his way to the cell block, heart pounding in his chest. The plan was simple. He would distract the guards while Liam helped get the woman to safety. He had no idea where they would go after that, but they couldn't stay here. They would have to figure it out once they were out of the base. When he reached the cell, he found her sitting quietly on the small cot, her eyes watching him. She stood up when she saw him, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. There was an unspoken understanding between them now. "I'm getting you out of here," Ethan whispered, glancing toward the door. "Are you ready?" She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I never thought I would have a chance to escape. I don't know what's out there, but I want to try." With that, Ethan moved quickly. He hit the emergency alarm to distract the guards, and loud sirens blared throughout the base. It was chaos, just as they had planned. The guards immediately began rushing to their posts, leaving the hallways empty. Liam appeared around the corner, motioning for Ethan and the alien woman to follow him. The woman moved quickly, her footsteps light despite the heavy orange jumpsuit she wore. Ethan couldn't help but glance at her, wondering how someone so strong had ended up in this situation. They ran down the dark hallways, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the silence. Ethan's mind raced, but he tried to stay focused. They had to move fast, or it would all fall apart. As they neared the outer gate, they saw the perimeter guards stationed at their posts, unaware of the chaos unfolding behind them. Liam signaled to Ethan, and the two of them quickly overpowered the guards, disarming them and pushing them into a nearby storage room. They had no time to waste. "Go," Ethan urged the alien woman, pointing toward the outer gate. "It's just ahead." But as they made their way closer to the gate, they heard the sound of footsteps behind them. The alarms had been triggered, and the soldiers were closing in. "They're coming," Liam shouted. "We don't have much time." Ethan's heart raced, but there was no turning back now. "We keep going," he said. "We can't stop." The three of them sprinted through the desert, the storm making it nearly impossible to see. Sand stung their eyes, and the wind howled in their ears, but they pushed forward. There was no other choice now. They had to escape, or they would all be caught. As they neared the edge of the base, the alien woman stopped for a moment, glancing back at the base that had held her captive. She had been a prisoner for so long that she almost couldn't believe she was finally free. Ethan caught up to her and offered his hand. "Let's go. It's not over yet, but we're getting out." With one final look back, the woman took his hand, and together they ran into the storm, hoping for a new beginning. Ethan stood there for a long time, the quiet of the room pressing down on him. He was starting to see her in a way he never had before. She wasn't just an alien. She wasn't just a prisoner. She was someone who had fought to survive, someone who had been shaped by the cruelty of war. And yet, in all that darkness, she had not lost her humanity. After a long pause, he spoke again, his voice firmer now. "I don't know what will happen to you, but I don't think this war has to end with all of us as enemies. Maybe we can find a way to stop it. Maybe there's still hope." The alien woman looked at him, her sharp gaze softening ever so slightly. "Hope," she repeated. "I thought hope was something that died with everything else. But maybe you're right. Maybe there is something worth fighting for." Ethan didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, he felt a spark of something. Something beyond war, beyond enemies. It was a connection, a shared understanding, and for the first time, he didn't feel like he was fighting alone. The alien woman lowered her gaze to the ground, lost in thought. Ethan stood silently, waiting for her to speak again. But for now, they didn't need words. The silence between them spoke louder than anything they could say. The wind howled as the three of them ran through the storm. Sand whipped against their faces, making it hard to see. But they couldn't stop. Every second counted. Ethan, the alien woman, and Liam pushed through the thick desert sand, their footsteps barely making a sound in the heavy winds. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. They had made it past the guards and the outer gate, but that didn't mean they were safe. The base was huge, and they had no idea how long it would take before the soldiers realized they had escaped. They had no backup, no plan beyond getting as far away from the base as possible. Behind them, the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. The soldiers had already begun searching for them. The alarm still rang in the distance, a constant reminder of the danger they were in. "We can't stop now," Liam said, his voice barely audible above the storm. He was looking ahead, trying to spot any sign of an escape route. Ethan nodded. He knew the situation was dire. They needed a safe place to hide, somewhere far from the base, where the soldiers wouldn't be able to track them. But the desert stretched for miles, and there was nothing but sand and rocks in every direction. The alien woman, still wearing the orange jumpsuit, moved swiftly beside him. Despite the harsh conditions, she seemed to be handling the storm better than they were. Ethan couldn't help but marvel at her strength. She had been through so much already: captivity, pain, fear, but now she was free. And nothing was going to stop her from staying that way. "We need to find shelter," Ethan said, his voice trained. "The storm is getting worse, and we're exposed." Liam looked around, squinting through the sandstorm. "There's a cave system not too far from here," he suggested. "It's a little out of the way, but it's our best shot." Ethan nodded. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than nothing. They changed direction, moving toward the cave system Liam had mentioned. Each step felt like it took them further from safety, but there was no turning back now. The storm raged around them, making the air heavy and suffocating. They couldn't see more than a few feet in front of them, and every gust of wind felt like a slap to the face. But they kept moving, driven by the hope of finding shelter. As they reached the base of a rocky hill, the alien woman stumbled. Ethan quickly reached out to steady her, concern flashing across his face. She looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude but also exhaustion. "I'm okay," she said softly, though her voice trembled. "Just a little tired." Ethan gave her a reassuring smile. "We're almost there. Just hang on." They continued climbing the rocky hill, and after what felt like hours, they'd reached the entrance to the cave system. The darkness inside was a welcome relief from the storm. They quickly ducked inside, trying to catch their breath and rest for a moment. As they huddled together in the cave, the sound of the storm outside grew fainter. They had made it for now, but the danger was far from over. The soldiers would be searching for them, and they couldn't afford to stay in one place for too long. Ethan sat down against the wall of the cave, his mind racing. They needed to come up with a plan. They couldn't stay in the cave forever. The base would send out search parties, and it wouldn't be long before they found the escape route and realized where they had gone. Liam spoke first. "We need to move. But where do we go?" Ethan looked at the alien woman. She was sitting across from him, her eyes closed, as if trying to regain her strength. He could tell she was exhausted, but there was something more, something that kept her going. A strength that Ethan admired. She was more than just a prisoner. She was a survivor. "I don't know where we can go," Ethan said, his voice low. "But we have to keep moving. We can't stay here." Liam nodded. "Agreed. The storm's going to die down soon, and we'll have a better chance of escaping once it does." Ethan glanced at the alien woman again, who was still resting, her eyes closed. "What about you?" he asked softly. "Are you okay?" She opened her eyes and looked at him, a small smile on her face. "I'm fine. I've been through worse." Ethan gave her a nod, but deep down, he knew she was not fine. She had been through so much already, and now she was free. But at what cost? What would happen to them next? "We need to get to a settlement, maybe somewhere far from here," Liam said, breaking the silence. "But we don't have much time. Once the storm clears, the soldiers will come looking for us." Ethan nodded. "We'll have to move quickly." As they prepared to leave the cave, the wind outside started to die down. The storm was finally passing, and the dark clouds that had covered the sky began to break apart. But that didn't mean they were safe. "We need to keep our heads low," Ethan said, standing up and brushing sand off his clothes. "Stay quiet, stay hidden. We can't afford to make any mistakes." The alien woman stood up as well, her gaze fixed on the distance. She had come so far already. This was just another challenge she would overcome. Together, they prepared to leave the safety of the cave, stepping into the still-blowing winds. Their journey was far from over. The soldiers were out there, and they wouldn't stop until they had captured them all. But Ethan was determined. He would protect her, no matter what it took. The sun had finally broken through the clouds, its harsh light blinding after the storm's dark grip. The trio stood at the edge of the cave, squinting against the light as they prepared to make their next move. The wind had died down, but the air was still thick with tension. They had no more time to waste. They had to act now before the soldiers found them. Ethan scanned the horizon, his mind racing. There was nothing in sight. The desert stretched out before them, endless and unforgiving. They couldn't stay hidden for long. The soldiers would be searching for them, and they had no idea how long they had before the enemy realized they were gone. "We need to get moving," Liam said, his voice tense but steady. "They'll be on us soon." Ethan nodded, feeling a tight knot in his stomach. "Where do we go from here?" The alien woman stood beside them, her eyes searching the distance. There was something about her that made Ethan feel more hopeful, despite the danger. She had already been through so much, but she hadn't given up. Neither had he. "We can't go back," she said softly. "We've come too far. There's only one way left." Liam raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" She glanced at Ethan before answering, her voice low but determined. "There's a town, far from here. A settlement where I can blend in. We can hide there." Ethan felt a flicker of hope. "How far?" 2 days, maybe 3, she replied. "It's the best chance we have." Without another word, the 3 of them began their journey toward the settlement. The sun beat down on them, its heat relentless, but they pushed forward. Ethan could feel the sweat dripping down his face, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Not now. For the first time in days, the alien woman seemed to relax. She walked with them, her steps steady and sure. Ethan glanced at her, wondering about the things she had endured. She wasn't just a prisoner anymore. She was a partner, someone who had proven that she could survive and fight back. The path was difficult. The terrain was rough, with rocky hills and patches of deep sand. But they made good progress, their determination driving them forward. Every step brought them closer to freedom. As the hours passed, the exhaustion began to set in. Liam stumbled a few times, his energy flagging, but each time Ethan helped him back on his feet. They couldn't afford to slow down. Not yet. By nightfall, they had made it to a small oasis. It wasn't much, just a few scattered trees and a patch of water. But it was a welcome sight. They decided to rest there, knowing they couldn't go much further without sleep. Ethan sat down under one of the trees, his legs aching. The alien woman sat beside him, her back against the tree. She looked tired, but her eyes were alert. She was always watching, always aware of her surroundings. Ethan admired that about her. She was strong. "You've come a long way," Ethan said quietly, breaking the silence. She glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I have," she agreed, "but it's not over yet." Ethan nodded, knowing she was right. Their journey was far from finished. They had made it this far, but the hardest part was still ahead. The soldiers were still out there, and the settlement they were heading to was no guarantee of safety. They would have to be careful. As the night stretched on, they made plans. They would continue their journey at dawn. They couldn't afford to waste time, not when they were so close. The alien woman would lead them the rest of the way, using her knowledge of the land. Ethan and Liam would follow her, doing their best to stay out of sight. But deep down, Ethan knew that even if they made it to the settlement, they might not be safe. The soldiers would eventually catch up to them. They were trained, relentless. But that wasn't going to stop him. No matter what happened, he would protect the alien woman. She had already proven herself to be more than just a prisoner. She had fought for her freedom. And for his. In the quiet of the night, Ethan found himself thinking about how far they had come. When he had first met the alien woman, he had never imagined they would be in this situation. But now, after everything they had been through, he realized something. They weren't just allies anymore. They were friends, and maybe even more than that. As the stars began to twinkle above them, Ethan took a deep breath. They still had a long way to go, and the danger wasn't over. But for the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to believe that they could make it. They could survive. Tomorrow would be a new day. And with it, a chance to finally escape the clutches of the soldiers and find a place where they could be free. The alien woman looked up at the sky, her face calm but resolute. "We can do this," she whispered. "Together." Ethan met her gaze, a quiet determination in his eyes. "Together," he agreed. As they sat beneath the stars, the weight of their journey settled over them, but so did the feeling of hope. They had fought for this moment. They had fought for each other, and no matter what came next, they would face it together.